Chain lube. You've got wet lube, you've got dry lube, you've got all conditions lube, you've got premium lubes. You've even got ceramic lubes and wax-based lubes. But which one do you really need? Let's have a detailed look, shall we? Due to the fact we all ride in different conditions at different times of year, you're going to need to consider different lubes to make sure your bike is running nice and smoothly. Now, the job of a chain lube is to penetrate the rollers and pins of a chain and to allow them to move freely. If you don't have any lube on the inside there, you've essentially got metal rolling on metal, which surely that means it's just going to wear faster. If you add into the equation dirt, grit, mud, water, all that sort of stuff, you're going to end up with a horrific grinding pace. It's literally going to be wearing out your money as you pedal down the trail. Now, a decent chain lube is going to fill that void and allow the chain to run nice and smoothly for a very long time. The problem chain lubes have is being able to stay in place. Because of the fact we've got dirt, mud and all that stuff going on, you're going to need different chain lubes to suit the conditions that you're riding in. So let's break them all down so you can understand exactly what they all offer. Dry lube. Okay, so this stuff essentially takes its name because of the fact that once application is complete, it leaves your chain touch dry, which means it's absolutely perfect for use in sunny conditions. Think of nice, dry, dusty trails in the summer, at least the summer in the Northern Hemisphere for the few days that we get it. What you don't want in conditions like that is that dirt and dust sticking to the chain. What that would mean is you're just going to get that horrible grinding paste building up and you're essentially going to wear it out as you ride. Dry lubes typically have a two-part formula. You've got the carrier and then you've got the lube itself. So the lubes can be oils, they can be synthetic, they can be PTFE, they can be waxes, they can be ceramics, it could be a number of different things, and they'll be suspended in the carrying fluid. Most traditional dry lubes on the market have a carrier that's solvent-based. Now, this solvent does a great job of getting the lubricating particles into the inner workings of the chain, and then of course it's just going to evaporate, leaving it touch dry. Now, the good thing with a dry lube like this is it's fast to apply, it's fast to evaporate, and means it's fast for you to get back out on the trail. However, as with many dry lubes, it does mean you're going to need more frequent application. Wax-based lubes, in theory, should be the best lubes to use in dry conditions on your chain due to the fact that hard, slippery wax can coat the inner workings of the chain, meaning they just work so well. The problem is, it's not always easy to get that wax into the chain. Now, there is a process known as hot waxing, and you're going to need something like this, which is a slow cooker. And you're going to need a paraffin-based wax. And the idea is you would fill one of these up with a relative amount so you can sort of submerge a chain in there. Now, the idea is that you completely submerge a chain that has to be in pristine condition. We're talking cleaner than a brand new chain. You can't have any packing grease on it at all. So you have to meticulously clean the chain, submerge it in that hot wax, pull it out and let it just dry. Then you're going to have to break the chain a little bit just to sort of get any excess wax off. Then you're going to have to reinstall it onto your bike using a fresh master link. Now, the theory is it works really well. It's really good in terms of friction reduction and it lasts a significant amount of time. The process, of course, is very laborious and potentially a little bit wasteful if it's something you want to do on a regular basis due to the fact that you really should be using a new master link each time. There is a company as well called Absolute Black that make a graphene infused version of a hot wax solution, which is designed to last a very long period of time. But again, the same principle of how you put it onto your bike. Can you really be bothered to take your chain off every time you want to do this? I know I can't. So the PT's dry lube is actually a wax-based formula. Now, there are some other wax-based dry lubes on the market. Some of them have a solvent base to them. This one's a little bit different. It has a water base, so it's like an emulsion formula. Now, the concept with this is that emulsion formula enables it to contain more wax, which is obviously a great thing for you. Now, the idea with this, you use it just like you do any other sort of dry-based chain lube. You apply it to a chain. That carrier, which is the emulsion formula here, carries those particles into the chain, coats everything with a nice slippery coating, and then it dries up. The difference between the water emulsion and the solvent is the solvent will dry that little bit quicker. This stuff will dry nice and fast in the warm, a little bit slower if it's cold and damp. Now, this particular lube, when you apply it to the chain, it's almost a milky blue in colour and actually dries to a clear state, so you get an indication of when it's good to ride. Now, the one last thing you really need to take into account with a dry lube is the thing that makes them so good also means it's a bit of a weakness if you do ride in wet and filthy conditions. If you have dry lube on your chain, yes, it's going to run nice and clean. The problem is, if you do encounter loads of muck and filth on the trails, it is going to sort of wash it out of your chain much faster than wet or all-weather lubes, which we're going to get to in a minute. However, due to the fact that your chain runs so clean with this stuff, it's actually, I've always said this in the past, dry lubes tend to be my favourite. I would rather be able to top up and then sort of do an interim clean every now and then, rather than have to do a full clean every time. But it is limited to the conditions you ride in, but I do like a dry lube for most of the year round, to be fair. Wet lube. As the name suggests, wet lube is indeed a very wet lubricant. Now this stuff will contain a blend of oils, waxes, and actually more importantly, corrosion inhibitors in there. Now the whole point of having a lubricant that's designed for using it in wet conditions is that you want to stop things corroding as you're riding, so you don't want to get any surface rust or anything like that. That's what wet lubes tend to have in them. Now wet lube is much thicker, it's a much more sort of viscous liquid compared to dry lubes, which is almost non-existent. And the whole purpose is it needs to be as hydrophobic as possible. It needs to stay in place. If you can put a lube on your chain and it washes off straight away, it's not really suitable for use in wet conditions. Wet lubes should stay put when you're rushing through puddles and muck and all that sort of stuff, because you really do need this stuff to stay in place in order to keep your chain lubricated. Now wet lubes by nature will always be the quietest in use. They're actually really efficient in terms of your transmission, and even when they do have mud and muck on them, they're surprisingly quiet. Quite often they'll be quieter than a dry lube in clean conditions. If you ride an e-bike, I would actually say a wet lube is going to be your best friend as far as all the lubes go. Even if you're riding in slightly drier conditions, the fact that this stuff sticks to the transmission is going to be a benefit to you because of the high load nature of the way e-bikes are riding. Just think, if there's no lube in that chain, you've got metal on metal just turning around. If you've got lube on there, it's going to be better than none. And of course, the downside to wet lubes is the fact that it will take a bit more to clean your chain than it will do with some of the other lubes on the market. And due to the fact that this stuff is going to attract dirt and loam and sand and other stuff to it, you're going to have to be quite meticulous with looking after your drivetrain. But hey, your bike is going to be absolutely caked in stuff if you need to use this as your lubricant anyway, so just make sure you clean everything and it'll keep things as wear-free as possible. Now the last point, I would actually say, if you're riding in wet conditions, arguably it's better to have a chain that's got mud and muck and all the other stuff stuck on it, but you've still got lube on there, than it is to have used a dry lube and have it all washed off by that point. After all, what you're trying to avoid is the metal to metal wear. You're trying to keep things lubricated. Of course, take that with a pinch of salt. Don't read between the lines too much there, because at the end of the day, that stuff is still going to wear your bike out. It's just you've got to make a choice of what suits you and those conditions you ride in. If it's raining outside or you're heading out for puddle splashing or on an e-bike, then that lube is going to be your best bet. All-weather lube. Now, as you might imagine from the title, it's designed to use in a variety of weather conditions, or more importantly, trail conditions. If you're to head out on a dry ride in dry conditions, but you encounter wet and muck, this is going to work for you, and vice versa. Now, if you're not sure what's going to be best for you out of the sort of the various different types of chain lube, this is probably where you want to start. There's various different all-weather lubes on the market, each having a slightly different formula. But the concept with these is that they're going to be better than using a specific lube in the opposite conditions, if that makes sense. So this is going to be better than using a wet lube if you ride in dry conditions, and better than a dry lube if you end up in wet conditions. So that is going to be your go-to. Right, so this one from Petey's, as you might be able to see from there, is kind of settled. Left it on the shelf there so you can see this. Now at the top you've got the clear fluid. This one's a corrosion inhibitor, a penetrating oil, and also a water displacer. So as well as doing all those things, it's going to transport that heavier fluid into the pins and rollers of the chain. And something quite unique about this is that this stuff, because it's got the penetrating oil in there, is actually going to flush out the crap and the old stuff that ends up on the inside of your chain links. Kind of cleans your chain as you ride. Now the secondary oil in here, this one is made up of waxes and oils, kind of the two sort of formulas you see in wet and dry lube, but both combined together. Obviously that's what makes it an all conditions lube. Obviously, to apply this, you need to give it a good shake. I wanted to leave this to settle so you could see it. Give it a good shake until it goes a blue color, and then you apply it to your chain, and it really does work its way in nicely. Now, as I referenced earlier, it can actually help clean your chain as you ride. So even if your chain looks clean, it might not be. If you apply some of this lube to it, that top fluid, when it works its way in, is actually going to start forcing out any old stuff that's in there. You might find a little bit of black gunk sort of appearing on those inner links of your chain. And that's what it's doing basically. So you want to wipe that stuff off, reapply more lube and carry on pedaling. And what you'll find is bit by bit, it actually cleans itself as you ride. Pretty cool stuff. And also PCs make a premium version of the all-weather lube. So if you want to have something like this, it just lasts a bit longer on your, well, in fact, a lot longer. You want to look at this stuff. So it essentially uses much finer ingredients and it will last 30% longer. But because of the ingredients in there, you're going to get a slight price hike for that 30% increase in durability. Okay, so you've gone to the hassle to figure out what chain lube you really need to be using, so it's only fair that you give your chain the correct treatment and apply it correctly. Now, I'm well aware that not everyone out there, because I'm the same as you lot, you don't really want to spend all that time degreasing everything every time you want to apply oil to a chain. So I'm going to give you 3 different options here. Obviously, I'm going to start with the correct one. So the correct way to apply chain lube, any chain lube to any chain, is start with a blank canvas. So that means cleaning your transmission. So you want to get yourself a drivetrain degreaser, preferably a non-solvent based one. This one is non-solvent based for a reason. They also make a solvent cleaner. Now, solvent cleaners by name, they're immensely powerful and they're designed to strip grease out. That's great on a chain, but it's not great if you end up spraying this all over your rear derailleur, over your rear hub, over your bottom bracket. You're also going to melt the grease in there. So for that reason, I would say using a drivetrain degreaser that's a non-solvent base is your best bet. And either get a chain bath or a decent brush and get in there, get it all completely clean, rinse it off, and then to make sure that that water is gone, use a water displacer. There's various different options on the market. Get a water displacer that's also a corrosion inhibitor, flush it all out, and then you can start applying the lube to your chain. So at that point, you pick the lube of your choice, whatever brand, whatever style you're going to use, and you want to apply it to the inner links of the chain. So that's at the bottom, cycle your chain backwards, start at the master link and end at the master link, and you know you've gone round a full revolution there. Applying it here is the fastest way to get it straight into those links in the right place on the chain. Now, if you're running with an all-weather lube, for example, and you're going to run it in wet conditions, you might also want to run some chain lube just on the top part of the chain as well, and that really does help the barrier against sort of water flushing it away from the chain there. If you're using a wet lube in this process, give it a minute to work its way into the chain, cycle it around a few more times, and then you might just want to wipe off the excess if it's not completely hammering it down outside. If it is, just get out there. You want all the protection possible. Now with a dry lube, if your one has a solvent carrier on it, by the time you finish lubing it and you put the bottle on the shelf, it will be dry and ready to ride. If you've got the PT style one that's got the water emulsion, if it's dry weather and it's nice and warm, it will be dry just as quick. If it's a bit cooler, you just got to wait until it goes clear and then you're going to be good to go. Next option, kind of like an interim service. So you're doing a little bit of cleaning here, but it's much faster than getting the degreaser out. Now this is if you come back from a ride and your bike's kind of dirty, but everything's all right and your drivetrain's running smoothly. Now note, if there is any sort of gritty feel to your drivetrain, then really you do need to degrease it and clean it properly. But if not, you can get away with this. So get yourself some shop towel, spray some of that non-solvent degreaser on your shop towel and basically pass the chain through it. Give it a good clean down, cycle it around, make sure it's obviously not making any noise. Use a little bit of water displacer just to flush it out again to make sure there's no degreaser left, because if there's degreaser on a chain and you put chain oil on it, it's going to start dissolving it, yeah? So you want to make sure that's off. And then of course, lube your chain the same way as I said with the full one, and then you're good to go. And then there's the last version, which really, this is one I actually use most often, pretty much because I keep my bikes in clean condition for filming a lot of the time. I'll get home from work or get home from a shoot, and I'll literally just put some water displacer on the chain, run it past with a rag on the chain, and then put a lube on, and you'd be good to go. But again, it has to be clean in the first place for that to work. And just remember one last thing, if you're using dry chain lube and you're in nice summer conditions and your chain looks nice and clean, you can just go ahead and put more dry lube over the top. Oh, there we go. So we've kind of broken down the differences in the chain lubes available on the market and where and how and why you want to pick certain ones. What sort of chain lubes do you use at home? Have you got all chain lubes? Have you got a preference? What conditions do you ride in? And what have you struggled with chain lubes in the past? Let us know in the comments down there. Don't forget to subscribe to GMBN Tech if you don't already do so, and share it around. Free content for everyone to benefit from. Take care, see you in the next video.